Hi guys, and welcome to today's PowerPoint presentation, mostly discussing steroids and fertility. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Von Wilson. I am the sort of owner of VW Physique, and I wanted to put together something for our clients, a client resource as such, that just discusses some of the concerns that they have based around the use of anabolic steroids and fertility. Now, this is something that I hold quite dear to my heart, and it was something that you could say, worried about for a long time. So I naturally can relate to any worry that you maybe perhaps are feeling or experiencing. But hopefully by the end of this, it gives you more of a sort of logical explanation of how things work in the body, what we can do in regards to sort of boosting fertility if we are going to continue steroids. And give you some sort of real life evidence. Before I begin, I must state that I'm not a medical professional by any means, and anything that I do say should be taken in the hypothetical. And if you are looking to obviously improve fertility, consult your sort of local medical professional. And I guess that gets all the pleasantries out of the way. So the aim of this presentation ultimately is just it's going to be a quick one. It's not going to be too long. But it's just going to provide a clear understanding of how testosterone is made in the body. It's going to discuss the effect of using steroids on what we call the HPTA axis, which you'll learn about in this PowerPoint. Explain how we would be able to boost sperm count whilst using steroids and to provide real life evidence. So, where is testosterone made? I guess I should move my face out the way on this one here. Alright, so testosterone itself is made in the testicles, the testes for short. However, its production relies on really a number of key factors upstream from the testes. And that kind of starts off in the brain at a place called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus itself, you could literally see that as the control center for pretty much everything. Everything flows through that. So there's you could say a downward pathway as such. That's going to be influenced from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary, which is going to produce two different hormones called LH and FSH, which I'll get into, which then directly stimulate the testes to produce testosterone. So this sort of whole process we call the HPTA, hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis, and it's an axis that regulates the reproduction itself. It's formulated from like a negative feedback loop by which that testosterone itself, if we have enough in, it's going to down-regulate. It's going to say to the hypothalamus, listen, I'm okay, we're all right, the levels are okay here. I don't need you to release GnHR to then the pituitary to produce these and then give us more. We're fine. It's also going to tell the anterior pituitary we don't need these hormones here. So what are these hormones? Let's talk through it. So the hypothalamus, as we said, it's going to release something called GnRH, which is gonadotropin releasing hormone. This sort of directly impacts the anterior pituitary. Now, this anterior pituitary is going to produce two different hormones. One that's called luteinizing hormone, one that's called follicle stimulating hormone, or follicular stimulating hormone. These themselves will act upon the testicles to produce testosterone, but also to stimulate spermatogenesis. This is where people kind of get mixed up. They think that both FSH and LH do the same thing, when in fact they are important and they both kind of rely on each other. However, they're going to have different jobs in the testicles in regards to what they do. But what I would say is that each part of this axis is very dependent upon the other, right? So if we didn't have enough testosterone in the blood, it would be saying, right, give me more, give me more, give me more. If the hypothalamus was overproducing GnHR, then we see an overproduction in LH and FSH, then maybe perhaps an overproduction in testosterone, right? So each part is very reliant on the other, and we can't have one without the other. So this is a little bit of a different diagram, which I thought would really explain in a bit more detail what FSH does, what LH does. And this is going to be really important for understanding how, spermatogenesis, how your body produces sperm. So you know that This is the hypothalamus. It is going to then have an impact on the anterior pituitary to GNHR, and then we've got FSH and LH. Now, LH itself, as you can see, kind of comes off here and impacts these type of cells called Leydig cells, right? Now, that will be in charge of producing testosterone. However, FSH itself is going to impact what we call the Sertoli cells in the testicles, which are directly in charge of spermatogenesis. Now, spermatogenesis, it needs testosterone to happen in a decent amount, but as you can see, there's two different pathways that these hormones act upon. And again, that'll be really important for us discussing. Okay, can you actually improve fertility whilst using steroids? Key thing here to think about: well, LH is doing one thing, FSH is doing another. Right? Our body produces these, but are these something that we can kind of use extraneously as well, which you'll find out. So, LH, FSH. Let's kind of discuss that in a bit more detail. As you can see, this is a bit more of a complicated diagram. The diagram's kind of got more complicated as the PowerPoint has went on. So, luteinizing hormone, as I said, stimulates, Leydig cells, or has an impact on Leydig cells, right, which is really, really crucial for spermatogenesis. As you kind of see here, we've got LH coming down from anterior pituitary, stimulating testosterone production in Leydig cells, which, as we said, really, really important for the actual production of sperm. However, FSH, which you can see down-regulated from the anterior pituitary, coming down, what that's going to do is stimulate Sertoli cells to produce androgen-binding globulin. It's also called androgen-binding protein and something called inhibin. Now, this protein itself, or androgen-binding globulin, is a protein that binds to testosterone and prevents it from leaving these sort of seminiferous tubules, shall we say. And inhibin helps support spermatogenesis, inhibits the production of FSH and LH from the hypothalamus itself. Now, this is kind of getting quite complex and big fancy words, and I'm not meaning to, but what I wanted to do is just give you a rough idea of, okay, LH doing one thing, FSH doing another, right? Moving on. So, what happens to this axis when we use steroids, right? What does anything happen at all? Well, the answer is absolutely it does. So this is the same diagram as you saw, I think, at the very start. This one here, right? So I put a cross here amongst nearly everyone. However, it's not entirely true. This isn't completely shut down. However, it is massively down-regulated. And the main thing to pay attention to is here. Testosterone inhibits LH and FSH production in the anterior pituitary itself, right? So it's because we've got such high levels of testosterone floating about the blood, it's constantly feeding back to the hypothalamus, the control center in the brain, to say, don't make any more, don't make any more, don't make any more, don't make any more. So what does it do, right? Down-regulates the production of GNHR, down-regulates the production of FSH and LH, so then down-regulates spermatogenesis, down-regulates testosterone production. Now, you don't need to produce any testosterone. Why? Because you're injecting it, right? However, what it does impact then is it does impact FSH and this ultimately spermatogenesis and ultimately your sperm count. Which is kind of where some guys, I guess, can worry about it. Now, yes, it will give you a low sperm count. However, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't necessarily be able to conceive whilst you're on it. It's just that your sperm count will be quite low. It would just be not as likely, if that makes sense. So the HPA axis and steroids, as we inject testosterone, as I said, we down-regulate this whole system. From our brain, our testicles tell us to make testosterone, stimulate spermatogenesis. But as I said, because levels of testosterone are so high, hypothalamus is continually receiving the signal saying not produce that, not produce that, not produce that. As I said, the production of FSH/LH is down-regulated. However, it doesn't mean that you're producing zero FSH and LH, right? It'll just be that you're producing a small amount. This is this is actually a blood test from myself a year or two ago. I can't remember if I was blasting or I was cruising or whatnot, but I keep them all on file. So what I wanted to show you was just the typical range that you would see usually of FSH and LH, and just how much they're obviously impacted because this is down-regulated here, right? So that we didn't actually see this, but as you could see, right, testosterone miles above where it usually is, right? It's usually between 8.64 and 29. I'm up 125 nanomole. You just need to do the math and see how much more of a percentage that is. So we obviously have a greater ability to add muscle mass, etc., etc. But we know that sort of sperm production, not just sperm production, but sperm motility as well, is quite low. Now that's really important. Not only being able to produce enough sperm, but produce sperm that are able to actually, say, swim up the fallopian tubes and fertilize an egg if you're trying to conceive. But everything in layman's terms, right? What would this mean? It's just going to mean that you're going to have a low sperm count, right? So at that point, I had a low sperm count for sure. Low sperm count kind of going to be considered if you have less than about 50 million sperm per milliliter, thereabouts. However, just because, as I said, just because your sperm count is low, it doesn't mean that you can't still get your partner pregnant. As Dr. Dean said to me, it only takes one sperm to just swim up, hit the egg, boom, and then that's the job done. But some of you, a lot of my clients ask me, is there anything we can do to boost sperm count and still use steroids? Some people think that you have to come off completely, which can be a viable option, of course, but some clients will want to stay on, and that's absolutely fine. So what I want to remind you of is that FSH and LH do two different things, right? So what you're trying to achieve then is you're trying to say, right, this system is kind of down-regulated, it's kind of crossed off effectively. I put in exogenous testosterone, I inject that, and then you might think to yourself, well, is there anything I can inject that's kind of like FSH? Oh, let me just go back. FSH and LH. Let's go back to this one here at the very start. Is there anything I can inject that's kind of similar to them? And the answer is abso-fucking-lutely. There is. There's something called HMG, right? Big fancy word for human menopausal gonadotropin. It's also known as menotropin, and it's hormonally active medication that's used in the treatment of fertility issues. Sometimes used in women, but it's also used in guys with a low sperm count. What it does is it acts as this exogenous FSH. So what you would be doing is injecting FSH. Now what that does, you start injecting FSH straight away, it starts telling the Sertoli cells, all right, okay, stimulate spermatogenesis. What's the other part of the equation? Testosterone. Well, you've got testosterone in abundance, right? So you start to then produce viable sperm. As I said, directly impacts Sertoli cells, spermatogenesis. Some people out there will suggest that whilst you do this, you use something called HCG or human. I can't even really say that word there. I'll let you read it. However, I'd say not to do that, mostly because it acts as exogenous LH, right? Now, LH itself is telling the Leydig cells to stimulate testosterone. However, you don't need that. You've already got loads in there, right? So I think putting HCG in it would be unwise, if I'm honest. There would simply be no need for that. So HMG itself would typically need to be run for about 12 to 16 weeks before you're going to notice FSH rise to those adequate levels and stimulate that spermatogenesis. Remember what I said between the usual average ranges. You check before you start using HMG, you run it for 12 weeks, you check again, see if you're within range, and you kind of know, like, right, okay, I'm producing enough sperm here. But you'd obviously check as well. You can kind of get tests from Boots or whatnot. The full process by which the body kind of lays down sperm, or a sperm cycle, you could say, is about 64 days. So after injection, you are probably going to need to wait at least, as you're injecting, because it's going to need to be a sort of bi or tri-weekly thing, you're going to need to wait a couple of months before you know, like, right, okay, I've got new sperm laid down that I know are going to be viable. There's going to be enough of them, and they're going to be motile as well. Generally, we say sort of 12 to 16 weeks because sometimes you don't get pregnant after the 64 days, right? You're going to have to sort of time it correctly, have a specific protocol with your partner about sort of when she's most fertile, and kind of work it around that. Does it work? Well, there you go. There's the answer. This is my wee boy at 17 weeks. We actually have his 20-week scan as of tomorrow, which I can't wait for. All is healthy, all is good. I ran HMG for 16 weeks in total, and this wee man has come out of it, and I could say I'm thrilled. I can't wait. This was a big sort of worry of mine was, would I be able to conceive if I'm going to use steroids? And the answer is, if you know the physiology, then you absolutely could. In the time I've used steroids, which has been well over sort of 8, 9, 10 years, I would say within bodybuilding, properly used them for 5, fucked about for about 4 or 5 before that. I didn't use anything to support spermatogenesis at all. I don't feel there's a need to try and be putting anything in, because you know your sperm count is going to be low as you are blasting. So what I would say is, when you choose a time that you want to conceive, it might be favourable, maybe perhaps when you're in a cruise phase yourself and you're coming down closer to the physiological range. However, personally, I wasn't. I was blasting, and my testosterone was fairly high, and when we were able to conceive, and that's just obviously the sort of real life evidence, I should say. I hope that you did find this sort of presentation useful. If you did, please do let me know about it. As I said, this is just sort of my opinion, based on my work with my own clients, but also the work that I've kind of done with myself. And it kind of comes from a lot of the kind of top guys in the industry, such as Dr. Dean and whatnot. We had a few calls prior to me and my wife trying to conceive, and as you can see, it's kind of worked out well. So listen, if you have any questions about anything, please don't be afraid to drop me a message or an email, whatever, and we'll catch up soon.